Hello and welcome to Chat DPS with me, Nick Lovell, and with Robert Feldman. Look, this week's been an interesting one. We started off thinking there was a very light week in news, and then all of a sudden things have kind of overtaken us a little bit. Today we're going to be talking about the ASIC look into or suing HSBC. There's something called MUT 1244. And there's we wanted to discuss a little bit more about who the real threat actors are currently and what's going on. And there's some surprises in some of the statistics that we've been able to draw out of the research that we've done on the internet. These are partly in the news, but it's sort of kind of stark when you start realizing some of the statistics that are being drawn from this, and the relative lack of data when it comes down to who is doing what and when and how and who's being prosecuted and how many attacks there actually are and what the cost of those attacks actually is. But without any further ado, I wanted to go straight into the fact that ASIC have chosen to sue HSBC. And what they're saying is that HSBC have been slow off the mark with regards to protecting their customers from scams. Robert, is this just a question of the regulators gnashing and baring their newfound teeth?
I think, and I've only looked at this story kind of quickly because I guess it's breaking news today. It's probably one of those zeitgeist things where you get quite a lot of media coverage of people being scammed. It's quite a popular story that appears in most media outlets, and you've also probably got the background of there's some new laws that have either come into force or are coming into force focused on the banks scam prevention framework. So you've got that bit of a background. So clearly it's been a focus of the government, and it's potentially that the regulator is moving with that current that's been out there from the government, that's been out there in terms of the media narrative. And here we are with ASIC, and my understanding is it's the first of its kind action against one of the major financial institutions, and interesting to see how it goes. So it relates to, I think it's like $23 million worth of losses that customers of HSBC have suffered over, I think, roughly 5 years. ASIC talked about systemic failures within, or alleged systemic failures within HSBC. So that these new laws will help to, I guess, fine-tune what institutions do in relation to scams and protecting their customers. But what will be interesting to see is once the regulator flexes its muscles here with HSBC, whether it turns its attention to any other financial institutions and any past issues they may have had in preventing scams with their customers. So I think it's, as I say, it's one of those things where the community probably expects a response from the government, from the regulator, and here we go.
Okay, so we'll watch that quite closely. I'm sure there'll be some updates in the weeks to come. So let's see exactly what we're going to be capable of learning over the course of the next month or two, I guess.
Yeah.
The second point of news was a kind of interesting one. This one really stood out. So this has been dubbed MUT 1244. MUT stands for Mysterious Unattributed Threat. And this attack has been sitting in some fairly serious, sort of security consultancies, systems for some time. So they've been suggesting for as long as a year now. And they're also thinking that so far they've stolen as many as 390,000 credentials from companies. And this is a supply chain hack. So, this is not new to you. It's not new to me, but supply chain appears to be, sort of like the king of the hour and what have you. And it seems to be where most damage can be done quickly. But I mean, sitting in somebody's systems for over a year, to collect, sort of really confidential information. These companies are companies like GitHub was actually mentioned, part of its open source, and GitHub provide a DevSecOps platform. So as part of its open source arrangement, and it's claimed that this particular malware actually covers up or conceals the backdoor that it enters through. And there's a mention of the fact that they use spear phishing, which is a cyber attack that involves creating personalized messages to create or trick the recipient into performing a specific action. The thing looks to be the exact opposite of COVID-19, doesn't it? It is in fact getting stronger over time rather than weaker. Yeah. So every time a device that's an infected device is closed down and restarted, it gets stronger because it gets more information and what have you. Typically, this thing seems to be working on SSH private keys, Amazon Web Services key, service access keys, command histories, and I suppose the amusing thing about this was that it also seems to mine cryptocurrency, which is a pretty expensive thing to do, right? I mean, so why wouldn't you use somebody else's computer to actually do that for yourself? Yeah. If you were going to mine it? And these things are being then dropped off into things like Dropbox, and the cryptocurrency is then transferred into some nebulous account. This seems really sophisticated. I mean, it's not a word that you'd use lightly, right? It's sophisticated.
Yeah, on the one hand, it seems very sophisticated in terms of the code they've used and the fact that they've infiltrated open source software to do that, and sometimes they've kind of planted Trojans which have malware attached to them, and sometimes the code is quite benign, but it can also trigger like some of these malwares to be triggered and implemented. So on the one hand, it seems very sophisticated. On the other hand, it seems as though they have made some mistakes within their team. So let's assume there's a number of them involved. And so maybe there's some sophistication in some areas and some naivety in others, which I think has allowed this particular hack to be discovered. So I think that there's that, and I guess there's probably some link to the story that we spoke about last week about Salt Typhoon and this so-called biggest hack ever, particularly in relation to the US, alleged hack from this Chinese affiliated group called Salt Typhoon, and where that was sophisticated and it sat within systems for a long time. So I think this one, what is it, Mark 1244 or something, is similar in its sophisticated and the perpetrators are sitting within inside systems for long amounts of time, gathering information, gathering credentials to use in whatever way they might for this cryptocurrency, or whether they're actually using it to access and exfiltrate information. But there's similarities, I think, in terms of that. Some hackers can be quite kind of brute force and rudimentary about how they go about things, and some of them can clearly be quite sophisticated in the methods they use.
Yeah, this one's been a run and run, obviously, because of the scale of it, and also the so-called sophistication of it. It's kind of interesting who's been targeted in this particular instance. It seems to be security consultancy firms, and they're those that are doing so-called secure backups. So kind of interesting, because there's obviously some broad connotations to that. I guess moving on slightly, there was some items in the news that were kind of interesting, and what we're beginning to see is people looking to the usual suspects, Russia and China. And those two large organizations are significant threat actors. However, there were some surprises in this package as well. So as long ago as 2019, Germany was one of the, what was at the height of 300,000 cybercrimes, which was kind of a surprise to me. And the one that sort of was of interest, the other one that was of interest to me was Vietnam. So Vietnam were responsible for 1,300 attacks. Quite a big number. Vietnam we hear about quite often, but is it the fact that maybe Vietnamese ones are stronger, faster, better, clearer, or is it the German ones that were just well, it was just 300,000, but they were quite weak, or is it I'm kind of really concerned about this. I'm also seeing 320,000 coming out of Brazil, of all places, in 2020. And we're the biggest populations on Earth. I mean, obviously China, but the other one is India. India is 52,000 cybercrimes. So that's kind of an interesting kind of place to start this conversation. How are you seeing those numbers?
Oh, I guess it's very hard, obviously, to compare country to country and without sort of doing a deep dive into the data, exactly what's going on. So are some countries more vulnerable to attacks from external threat actors, whether that's nation states or other groups? Is it there's a high degree of internal focus cybercrime? Is it that some countries are being more affluent that they get targeted? So Germany, you mentioned it as an example. So is there something to do with the state of that particular economy, or is it that some countries are just more vulnerable in terms of being able to be infiltrated by hackers because they just don't have good cybersecurity? So there's so many variables at play here that it's been very hard to sort of be able to compare, between the different countries unless you went really deep into that data. But I guess the other thing is there was some news the other day about Australia. Now, I can't remember exactly, but I think the number of cybercrimes, I'm going to say somewhere around 50, 60,000 per year, I think, are reported through the ACSC. But there was some interesting information that came out that suggested that there was something like 30 or so successful prosecutions that have been made by the government for cybercrimes over about 5 or 6 years. And I guess the question was, that I had in my mind was, is that a reasonable number? And I think when you actually compare it to the amount of prosecutions that are happening, say, China or the US, and you try and normalize that data as much as you can by, say, scaling it back to the population. Australia seems a long way behind by factors of 5 or 6 compared to other countries in terms of prosecuting cybercrimes. And again, it's very hard to compare different countries, but I think enforcement has been one of the things we've talked about, and the need to actually invest in enforcement and actually follow through, whether it's the regulators or if the police are involved in particular crimes. But I think that there is a stark difference between what's happening in Australia and what's happening in the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think the thing that struck me there was USA. What would you say? 32 successful prosecutions here in Australia, but in the USA it was something like 2,590.
If you normalized it, yeah.
Normalized, yeah. And then there's if you start looking at things like China, for instance, 282,000 prosecutions. Now then, quite clearly that we're in a different plane to these guys, right?
Yeah. That's right. So I think, as I say, I think there's a theme here of reinforcement, and I think compared to the other countries, we've got a long way to go. You could say that we're making some strides because of all the legislation that's come about, the activity of the regulators, but I think we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, I mean the scale of both Russia and China together is kind of interesting to me. I mean, $850 billion in 2022 alone. And the average age apparently was between 18 and 40. Still, quite a long way to go with this. The objective here is for us to give a short, sharp oversight, I guess. That's been all from me. Any finishing words from you, mate?
No, I think that's all for today.
Perfect. That was Chat DPS for this week. We thank you and wish you a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year. We'll be back in the new year and look forward to doing a catch-up version of this so that we can actually, sort of fill you in on what's been happening in the world whilst we've all been smoking our pipe with our slippers on. Take care. Have fun. Be good. Bye now.